好，那今天晚上呢，在开始之前呢，我也快速的介绍一下这位导师的背景。他首先呢是在另外一个非常 top 的一个 college admission consultancy 的 agency 呢做 director，所以他的经验是非常丰富的啊。他也是 lead consultant，同时呢，他还是 senior writer。consultant，在 Cornell Writing Center，他同时也是 researcher 在 Stanford University。他今天跟我们探讨的主题和内容是：第一个是在我们课外活动这个角色，这整个大学申请过程当中的角色是什么？第二，哪一些课外活动是非常非常有用的和花的时间是有效的？第三个就是在整个 evaluating 的过程当中，by 这个 admission committee 他们是怎么来看课外活动 engagement 这件事情的？所以他今天分享的主题和内容，是在这个一个方面。那么，我现在就把 floor 交给我们的导师。
Hi everyone, thank you so much for attending. My name is Annabel. Sophia mentioned I want to thank the team at IvyCompass as well as Alliance for Impact and all of the participants here today who've joined my webinar. What I'll be presenting on today is building a standout extracurricular portfolio. The reason I chose this topic is because I believe there's a lot of misconceptions or myths around what a standout extracurricular portfolio should be. So hopefully, throughout the day's webinar, we'll be discussing, what makes a strong extracurricular portfolio, how these portfolios are evaluated, and of course, answering any questions at the end of the presentation. So I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Yes, please.
Wonderful. Okay, excellent. So again, we're going beyond the classroom today. I think it's pretty clear that in order to earn admission to a top tier college, you have to be a top tier student. You're looking at a 3.9, 4.0 GPA for most of these schools unweighted, as well as numerous AP or IB classes, right? But something that's a bit more nuanced and complex is looking at how colleges evaluate a student's extracurricular portfolio. It's certainly not a check the box approach. You might have heard of the term holistic admissions. What this basically means is that top tier colleges, especially top tier, but most colleges have adopted this approach when they do evaluate applicants. But if we're looking specifically at the Ivies or T30 colleges here in the US, they use something known as holistic review to evaluate applicants. I think this is a really important concept to understand prior to diving into, the granularities of extracurriculars. So what we mean by holistic review is looking at the applicant as a whole. So there's not, a check the box approach or, a series of items that the student needs to sort of meet formulaically to earn admission to these schools. Although I will say academics takes precedence over, a lot of other portions of the application. But you can look at the application as a way to tell your story, building a narrative around your candidacy, around your interests, goals, how you've contributed to your community, however community is defined to you. So this could be at school, your broader local community, maybe it's a community that you identify with. So they're looking at the student holistically, understanding how they'll contribute to these college campuses, and really what's their particular story? How have they conveyed that through the essays, for example, the activities section of the Common App? And so this is where extracurricular activities really come into play in delivering this holistic narrative about a student's candidacy. So really, it's a great way to tell your story, showcase how you excel in your interests, beyond just, of course, your grades and your transcript. That's the first thing admissions officers are going to evaluate, but also, they're looking at evidence of leadership, excellence in your community, how you've made an impact. So we'll dive deeper into some of these topics today throughout the course of the webinar. All right, so this is a bit about me. Sophia introduced some of my academic background. I am a Cornell University graduate. For the past 7+ years, I've been working directly with students, as well as, of course, families to guide them through the college admissions process, delivering a variety of academic support. I have held academic support positions with Cornell University, where I partnered closely with Cornell's Writing Center director to serve as a senior writing consultant. I trained, hired several team members at the Cornell Writing Centers. I was also the lead application specialist for the university. So throughout my professional career, I've reviewed hundreds upon hundreds of college essays. One thing about my approach to this process is that I certainly challenge students. So, oftentimes a draft of the personal statement will take probably 5 to 10, sometimes even more attempts before, it's perfected and ready to be submitted. So I certainly don't give the green light till I feel that essay is worthy of being sent out to a college admissions committee at one of these schools. So, writing is certainly my bread and butter, being able to take what a student has accomplished, put it together cohesively, and delivering a strong narrative or story around that. Many high-achieving students struggle with this very task. So they might be extremely accomplished in their academics, 4.0 students, 1,500 or above on the SAT. And they also have, a wealth of accomplishments in their extracurriculars. But sometimes, the challenge lies in how to deliver that message effectively. So that's where writing comes into place, being able to really describe and quantify the impact of your results. How are we going to think outside of the box when we look at a personal statement prompt? When we address why this college, being able to get granular and specific, being able to align yourself with what the university has to offer. So this is where my writing background can be extremely valuable, for students who are applying to these top tier schools. Again, I see even the most high achieving students struggle with this very task. So, I serve as a coach, a mentor for students. This is, I often get to ask, what's my coaching style? I would say definitely a coach that challenges students, top-notch writing background in terms of my training and my education at Cornell. And, really being able to understand what that student's goals are, what colleges are best fit to support that student in their academic journey, and then really delivering a standout narrative in the different parts of the application. Okay. In terms of my success and results, so I work with students from, a variety of geographic locations. But, what's common is that I work with students who are high achieving, who are targeting very selective colleges and universities, and being able to determine of these incredible universities, we need to be strategic and select the ones that are best fit, understanding when we're applying to those schools in the timeline. So early action, early decision to maximize your chances of admission, and then the regular decision schools as well. My students are by and large targeting T20, T30 colleges here in the US. So they've earned admission to some schools like Carnegie Mellon University, Columbia University, University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business, USC, NYU, Johns Hopkins University of Chicago, for example. My academic training, yes, I was a humanities major, but in fact, believe it or not, I actually work with many STEM students throughout this process because they're really looking to engage with someone who can help them stand out, think creatively, work with them through the writing process. So actually, the majority of the students I have worked with come from STEM and business backgrounds, although, of course, I have supported humanities and social science students as well. That's a bit about the type of students I work with and some of the universities they've earned admission to. Just some things here again, writing background, student development. A lot of students, this process comes with, a lot of pressure and stress often for students. They work very hard in the classroom to get the grades that they want. They're often anxious about applying to college, not really sure, which colleges they should focus on or, what they need to do to really maximize their chance of admission to the college of their dreams. A lot of this is building confidence, and confidence really helps a student translate, their achievements to, something that is really excellent, something that's leadership focused, And I have a slide dedicated to leadership because I do think that that's something that really stands out for a student who might be applying to, pretty selective college and a student who's applying to the most selective colleges here in the country. I think one of the key factors here is honing in on that student's leadership skills and how they've made an impact in their community. This is something Ivy League schools really deeply care about, is students who are leaders, students who have made an influence, a positive influence within their communities. However, again, community is defined for that student. So leadership is extremely important. I actually have a dedicated slide for that as well. School selection and demonstrating fit, again, having, guided hundreds of students throughout this process, being able to, understand when I work with a student, what their goals are, what their interests are, what kind of school environment is best equipped to support that student's goals. And of course, admissions officers are also looking at this. Is a student the right fit? They might be qualified, but perhaps they're not the right fit for their university for a number of reasons, whether it be the right academic program or, a variety of other factors that are considered as well. Interview preparation, students, oftentimes are requested to attend interviews for top tier US colleges. If you don't receive a request for an interview, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They have a staff of admissions interviewers who submit a report along with the student's application. So being able to effectively prepare that student, confidently present themselves, knowing what points to hit in a conversation with an admissions interviewer is, something that can really give them an edge in the admissions process. The admissions interviews are not necessarily admissions officers. They're typically alumni from the university who have been hired to interview potential, candidates, young students at high schools, getting to know them a bit more, just to add an additional layer sort of perspective to their candidacy. Narrative building, again, this is really the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the college application, beyond, of course, what a student accomplishes in the classroom, their transcript, their grades, GPA, SAT score. This is not the end all be all of how a student is admitted. In fact, every year, dozens of applicants, hundreds of applicants are denied admission to these schools with perfect grades. Okay, so that's where that narrative development really comes into play, the writing, the extracurricular portfolio, and that's really the reason why I'm presenting on these topics today as well. Okay, so, the extracurricular involvement is showcased in a few ways throughout the college application. Students will have a resume. Now, not all colleges require a structured resume. But anyway, if I'm working with a student who is, accomplishing extremely, impressive achievements throughout high school, they're applying for a variety of summer programs, for example, internship opportunities, research programs, we might be reaching out to professors, for example, or they're introducing themselves for another opportunity. That resume can help open a lot of doors, beyond just the college application itself. However, some schools do allow students to submit a resume in addition to their Common App, which allows students to explain more about some of those achievements. As I'll explain in a moment, the Common App actually has very limited space for explanation as far as your extracurriculars. So they're really looking for impact, quantification of those results, and then using the essays to expand on some of those engagements as well. The honors and awards section, this is something I definitely encourage my students to do, is participate in tournaments, competitions. Hopefully that student can rank not only at the local level, but, continue to excel in that craft and that talent, at the state level and the national level. Why is this important? Ivy League schools are choosing the cream of the crop applicants, not only within, that particular state, but actually the entire country. So if you're able to rank, at the state level and even the national level and whatever your talent is, that allows the admissions committees to understand, these are the cream of the crop applicants that we're receiving nationwide. Okay. For some students, of course, they're coming from more competitive geographies than others. So for example, a student living in New York City, for example, or Los Angeles, is up against a lot of competition. Compare that to a student, who might be living in, let's say, Kentucky or Wyoming, right? So they also take into account the context of where that student is applying from. And so that's why sort of the demographic questions are part of the Common App as well. They're looking to, get a fair number of applicants throughout the country and also admit students from, different backgrounds as well. But again, those extracurricular activities really help to build a story around that student's interests, talents, passions, and goals. The high school contributions a student achieves helps also the admissions committees understand how that student will contribute to the community at the college. So if that student has been actively involved in music for the past several years, has placed at the state, even national level, let's just say in marching band, right? And that school, offers a variety of different opportunities for students to engage within music, performances, competitions. And, of course, through the essays, for example, we might also align that student with the opportunities at the school. So the admissions officers are really looking to build a well-rounded cohort of students with students who each have their own niche. And I'll dive deeper into this topic in just a moment, but it really helps admissions committees understand, how that student will also be sort of integrated within the college environment at that particular school. So to put this into perspective, there are many different kinds of extracurricular engagements. I talked about music. There's also dance, cultural engagements, STEM, academic competitions, speech and debate, for example, social justice, student government, paid work opportunities, internships, research. There's a lot of different things a student can be doing. So this kind of begs the question, do I need to do all of these? Or which ones are most important? So the Common App gives students 28 different selections for the type of extracurricular engagement that they're listing. However, students only have 10 entries on the Common App in their activities section. So by no means are colleges expecting you to do all 28 of these things. In fact, the depth of your involvement is much more important than breadth in this case. Now, let me add that students who are admitted to Ivy League and top 20 schools, yes, they're extremely involved in their extracurriculars. So it's very unlikely that that activity section is just going to be 3 different activities. You're likely going to fill up the 10, okay, or up to around that number. But it's important to have a defined focus and a purpose behind each of those engagements, okay? So it's typically, those 3-4 engagements that are most important, and you should rank them in order of importance. But students who I've seen as successful applicants to these schools are very much involved. However, there are very specific reasons and sort of a strategy and an intention behind all of those engagements. They're not just, a bunch of scattered extracurricular engagements that don't really contribute to a narrative or a story, right? So there needs to be a purpose. It has to be really aligned with that student's interests and talents, being able to achieve things within these engagements. So again, the depth of the involvement is much more important than, doing 20, 30 different things throughout high school. But I do notice that, highly successful applicants are very much involved in their schools and their broader communities. And not all applicants, need to have, one of these things in order to stand out. Again, it's how we sort of package this all together within the application. So to answer these questions, which ones are most important depends on the applicant, really depends on the student, their interests, their goals, and how we're going to be able to shape a narrative around that student's skills, talent, so on and so forth. So, there's a variety of different things a student can do, as you can see here, but being able to really understand the student, coach them, and direct them towards those engagements that they'll, genuinely excel in. So why is it important to get, deeply involved in these activities? Well, the depth of the involvement that a student has in these extracurricular engagements can demonstrate a few qualities that they have. And these are the types of students these Ivy League schools are trying to recruit. Students who are passionate, resilient, enthusiastic, creative, ambitious, and definitely, students who have that intellectual curiosity. So how do you demonstrate this beyond a transcript? Well, that's where the extracurricular portfolio really comes into play. The essays and how we deliver this story through those writing components. So the extracurricular portfolio is such an important tool in standing out in a very highly competitive admissions process. These schools have seen the 4.0s, they've seen, 10 plus AP classes, they get this kind of applicant. A lot of students are competing for a seat. So how can you stand out? Well, by demonstrating these qualities. Okay, and that's where, your extracurricular activities come in, but also the purpose behind that and what you've achieved. I spoke a bit about this, the well-rounded versus angular concept in the college admissions process. A couple years back, maybe 10, 20 years back, the common narrative, and maybe it's still, pervasive today, is that, colleges are looking for a well-rounded student. Well, this certainly isn't the case anymore. And what colleges are looking to do is build a well-rounded cohort of students. So what this means is that they're looking for students who have different talents, different interests, who are going to contribute to a diverse cohort of students that they're looking to make up. So they're looking to build a well-rounded class. But as far as the individual applicant, which is, the point of concern here for a student, is what is that student's specific niche or angle, right? Where do they fall into that well-rounded cohort? Okay, so that sort of niche that student is able to define within their application will give them a competitive edge in defining what kind of applicant they are. A lot of students come into this process, younger students, who have just started off in high school, they'll say, oh, I really like science, I really like biology. All right. There's a lot of science, especially biology applicants. It's one of the more popular majors in the admissions process. So it's important to not just say, hey, I'm applying as a biology major, but this is the kind of biology major that I am. Cornell University actually has an excellent essay prompt that I think most explicitly addresses this key point here. For the Cornell S.C. Johnson School of Business, students have to respond to an essay prompt that, explicitly asks, what kind of business student are you? So we can expand this to pretty much any discipline. What kind of biology student are you? What kind of computer science student are you? So on and so forth. Being able to define your particular angle or niche within your discipline. So you can get more specific. You can work with the student to say, okay, you like biology. Well, what kind of concepts have intrigued you so far within biology, right? Okay, I like genetics. We can even go further with that. Just as an example, I have a deep interest in genetics, specifically how CRISPR tools are revolutionizing biotechnology. Now, as an admissions officer, I know, okay, this is not just a bio applicant, but this is an applicant who's interested in genetics and specifically biotech, right? So now I'm able to take this into account as I build a well-rounded cohort of students. I can't have all of my biology majors be, concentrated within genetics. I need to have, a more diverse cohort of biology majors, but each student brings their own niche to the table. So you can take that interest and dive deeper into community issues related to your interests. So maybe, there are issues within health, medicine, or biology happening right within your community that you can explore further and continue to research throughout your high school studies. You can even reach out to local colleges in your area. And how do you do that outreach? You would start with, the department. If you're, let's say, for the sake of this example, biology, you would research, local biology departments at a local college in your area. you can reach out to those instructors or TAs to learn more and get involved in the kind of research that they're doing. So I think this is a great way for students to dive deeper into a specific academic interest area that they have as well. And this would be part of that student's extracurricular portfolio as, for example, a research opportunity. Hopefully that student can even get published, maybe write for a local journal or paper, for example, or even publish. Maybe they can start a school science journal, for example, where they have different columns. Maybe it's one on genetics, they get published there, or maybe they edit other papers for students who are, submitting a variety of reports on, let's say, that student's field of interest. So these are ways that students can get more angular within their extracurricular activities. Leadership, just to give you some examples of sort of the different tiers or levels of involvement the student can display within their extracurricular engagements. Let's take a very common extracurricular activity, Red Cross, right? Red Cross is a great way for students to gain community service hours, volunteering hours. So you might say, oh, well, let me not waste my time doing Red Cross. So many students do it. It's not really the case. A lot of students do speech and debate. A lot of students do marching band, theater, and that's totally fine. If that's what interests a student, great. Continue to nurture that talent, that skill, that interest, but being able to also think, how can the student really stand out and excel within those talents that they have? So not just being, a member of Red Cross. Yes, that's very common. That alone does not help the student stand out, but there are different sort of levels of engagement a student can display. And that's really what can wow someone who's reading the application, right? So let's just take this example of the Red Cross Club. Very common extracurricular activity. Red Cross is pretty much, something that students can participate nationwide, right? So a good way to, describe your involvement in Red Cross, if you're a member, is say, I attended the Red Cross Club meetings twice per month and I volunteer in my community. Standard, nothing wrong with that, but it certainly won't wow me if I'm reading your application. A step better is to say, through Red Cross, I have helped gather over 100 pieces of gently used clothing for families affected by natural disasters in my home state. Okay, great. I can see how this student is now actually a very active member of their Red Cross and helping within their community as well. Okay, I have a more specific sort of picture view of how the student is positively contributing to their school and their broader communities. But this is really the wow factor here, is a student who is able to really demonstrate leadership. And that's not only having a title, although in this example, again, having the title alone is not, the wow factor itself, but how we're able to quantify and describe the impact of your involvement. So as treasurer of Red Cross Club, hey, there might be, dozens of other Red Cross treasurers competing for the same seat as you are, but what did you actually accomplish in that leadership role? So as treasurer of the Red Cross Club, I've led initiatives to increase club membership by 20%, creating subcommittees focused on different fundraising initiatives for disaster relief in our community. Over $10,000 has been raised to support food, water, and clothing distribution. So you can see how this, delivers that impact, much more clearly than just saying, I do Red Cross, right? So do thousands of other students throughout the country. But what have you accomplished there? What's been your impact? And how have you leveraged your role as a leader there? So describing your impact is a challenge for students. They're not given, unlimited space to do so. The Common Act actually gives you, again, 10 entries for your extracurricular activities. However, we can leverage other parts of the application to continue to describe your extracurricular involvement. This might be, for example, the additional information section. Let's say you're a student who's done a lot of lab work, a lot of research, for example, and you can't describe the extent of that in only 150 characters. Well, additional information section on the Common App should be leveraged to provide additional context on what you've done, what you've accomplished, and your impact there as well. The essays will sometimes allow students to, most of the time, allow students to further discuss extracurricular engagements as well. So how we sort of embed that into essays is also a way to describe your impact. They'll also be looking at the extent of your involvement. So they'll ask you about hours per week that you've dedicated to that extracurricular activity, as well as the weeks per year. So the extent of your involvement is also important. So if you have, again, 20 different extracurricular activities, you only dedicate maybe 2 hours a month to these activities, that's not really, the purpose of doing this. Again, it's about being able to integrate yourself within, the community, however community is defined to you, being able to showcase your skills and your talents and excelling as, a leader, not just having, a title, but leadership can be demonstrated in a variety of ways. It's more so, how you've made a positive influence with others, have you maybe been able to grow a club or make a positive change there, transform the club, pitching ideas, being innovative, showing that intellectual curiosity. So that's where describing your impact really, really comes into place. Order matters as well. So a lot of students think that in the Common App, I'll just order them chronologically. It's very important to order them in order of actually importance. So the activity that's most impressive should go first on your Common App, and being able to also order the activities sort of with that narrative in mind, right? So in order of importance, so that order matters, as well as a quantification of your results. You only have 150 characters to be able to deliver this information. So every character, every word counts. It's really about, quantifying that impact, using strong action verbs, and making sure that the writing is strong as well. These are some examples of essays Ivy League schools have published on their applications in order to learn more about the students' extracurricular activities, as well as the impact that they'll make on their campus and beyond. Again, what these Ivy League schools are looking for: cream of the crop applicants, students who are leaders, and students who will come to the university, make a clear impact, and then once they're graduating as alums, being able to represent that university and what they'll accomplish after they've received their degree. So that impact is not just limited to what a student accomplishes in high school. They're looking to see how will this student be able to thrive in our campus setting, and then with our sort of alumni title, right? I'm a Princeton grad, I'm a Cornell grad. What will the student accomplish, even after they've received a degree from us? So being able to really understand what kind of applicant this is, whether it's a STEM or humanities business student, what kind of applicant are you? And how will you make an impact on our campus based on what we've learned that you accomplished throughout high school? So here's an example of some essays. The first one is from Yale University. They asked, reflect on a time when you have worked to enhance a community to which you feel connected. Why have these efforts been meaningful to you? You may define community however you'd like. You've heard me say this a few times throughout the presentation. Community, define however you define it, right? You can see Yale's actually using the same verbiage here in this essay prompt. So community is very important to these Ivy League schools. So is leadership, right? Not just being a good student in the classroom, but students who go beyond that, right? Excellent stars, talented students. So being able to understand how the student is a change maker, an influencer, positive influencer within their community. And so that sort of personal branding, that niche, that angularity really comes into play as well with these essay prompts. Berkeley asked, describe an example of your leadership experience in which you have positively influenced others, helped resolve disputes, or contributed to group efforts over time. Again, we can see the importance of what these schools value in an applicant: leadership, ambition, resilience, right? They asked, how have you helped resolve disputes or contribute to group efforts over time? Princeton asked, Princeton has a longstanding commitment to service and civic engagement. Tell us how your story intersects or will intersect with these ideals. I will say Ivy League students, Ivy League schools really appreciate when students, work to address, for example, some sort of social issues, social causes. They engage in meaningful acts of service to their community. So, it's important, and most high school students, especially because high schools in the United States require students to do volunteer hours as part of their graduation requirements. Most students end up doing volunteer and community service work anyway. But the type of student who's successful in a highly competitive admissions process will be more strategic and more thoughtful around how they acquire those community service hours. If the student, let's say, is passionate about environmental science, that student, instead of doing a random community, service involvement for the sake of getting their, 200 hours, can be more intentional. Say, maybe they spend their time volunteering at animal shelters or doing beach cleanups with nonprofits in their community, right? This contributes to that overall story, that narrative architecture that we're building. So yes, most students do community service, but you can be more intentional and strategic about what kinds of volunteer engagements you're participating in. After all, 200 hours is a lot of time to be spending, so you want to spend it wisely and in a way that really aligns with your interests as well. Here are some examples of extracurricular activities students that I've worked with have accomplished. And these are real examples, of course, anonymized for the sake of this presentation, but these are real examples of students I've worked with in recent years who have earned admission to top 20 schools. So this student was able to align their academic interests as a prospective business major with a social cause. So this student created a mental health awareness card game designed to facilitate open conversation and connections amongst other students. He developed a website, met with principals and administrators throughout his district. So, did, outreach, networked with those principals, introduced himself in person with his business partner, who he worked with to develop this card game, and ended up fulfilling over 100 purchase orders for schools throughout his district. So this mental health card game was something that the student was able to align, one, with a social cause he really cared about, as well as two, his academic interest in business, being able to show his skills, his networking skills, communication skills, sales and marketing skills are all embedded within this standout example as well. Here's an example of a student demonstrating talent within their field of interest. So the student was also a business applicant, earned admission to Duke University, his top choice. So this student was very academically focused, and he wanted to take a more research approach to demonstrating his talent. So he conducted detailed research on local businesses and their challenges faced. So he chose a few businesses within his community that he frequented regularly. Was able to also speak with them about what challenges they faced with things like customer loyalty and brand awareness, and actually develop strategic marketing plans for these businesses, submitted it as part of his business competitions through DECA, for example, in place at the state and national level. Here's an example of students really thinking outside of the box and extracurricular activities that are quite uncommon. So I mentioned a few, SGA, student government, Red Cross, Rotary Club. These are very common extracurricular activities, and they can still be, excellent accomplishments to highlight on your application, so long as you really quantify that impact and describe it effectively. There are some extracurricular activities, however, that are very unique to the student and can really catch an application reader's attention. And this is where really understanding the student, coaching them, being able to challenge them to really think, okay, how can we incorporate your interest into your portfolio, even if it's just a hobby? So this student was actually a computer science applicant, earned admission to UChicago. But this extracurricular portfolio demonstrated quite a bit of creativity for this student. So the student developed a virtual film club in 2020 during the quarantine that connected over 50 international participants to discuss and publish reviews on dozens of films. So this was just a hobby of his, no intention of becoming a film major in college. However, it was just a personal hobby that he was able to transform into a really standout extracurricular engagement. Here's a case study of a student, for sake of this presentation, again, anonymized, we'll call him Anthony. So this is a student I worked with. Anthony received a 35 on the ACT, had an unweighted GPA of 4.0, so perfect GPA, not a B in sight, with 14 AP classes under his belt, a weighted GPA of 4.3, prospective business major, attending a top-ranked public school in the state, and dual enrolled at a local college. Dual enrollment means when you take college level courses at a local college in your area. And this, definitely helps with course rigor considerations as well as the weight on your GPA. The objectives I took with this student. So I worked with the student to define his angle and what type of business applicant he is. This student was very academically focused, prioritized a lot of research, and was a very strategic type of business student. Definitely had a lot of coaching around his leadership engagements, being able to grow the number of members that were in his club, for example, coaching him on what types of initiatives to implement within his clubs as well. So, we work with the student to define his angle, what type of business applicant he is, coach him on expanding his leadership engagements with revision of numerous drafts of essays, being able to work with that student because he was very academic, very research, very structured in his approach, working with that student to actually take a more creative and nuanced approach to tackling these essay questions. Okay, so less of a robotic sort of formulaic approach to the essays and more creative and nuanced. I have this number written out here, 43 quintillion, something to that effect. This student had a deep passion for Rubik's Cubes ever since childhood. It's just been a childhood hobby of him as well. So I learned this about him throughout the course of coaching him. And I said, well, this could be a really cool essay topic if we're able to get more creative with how we align sort of maybe your strategies that you implement as a business student within your clubs and the strategies that you deploy, when you're solving a Rubik's Cube and the amount of combinations and possibilities that you have to consider to get the best result. So we were able to sort of develop a personal statement that was more so an extended metaphor of that connection between the strategy of solving a Rubik's Cube and the strategy of making business decisions. So this is just, an example of one student I worked with and how I was able to, really challenge that student to think outside the box creatively, take a more nuanced approach to how we're positioning him within this overall narrative. Here's some frequently asked questions I get regarding extracurricular activities. So the first, should my child prioritize prestigious or high-profile activities over their genuine interests and passions? So this question sort of divides two things when they should really, live together, right? The student's genuine interests and passions can also align with prestigious and high profile activities. So, and also that student's genuine interests and passions might also stand out in a way that's not tied to prestigious or high profile activities, right? So it's a bit more nuanced than that. A student tends to excel the most and demonstrate that talent when they are engaging genuinely with their interests and passions. So the student is able to nurture that, think creatively with those interests, quantify their impact, work on their leadership. That's really what they're zooming in on. So, prestigious, high profile activities, let's say competing at the national level, I think that's excellent. And typically a student gets there because they've engaged with that genuine interest. Okay, but a student can also say, for example, the quarantine film club example I gave before, That's typically not classified as a prestigious or high profile activity. However, that was the first activity listed on that student's Common Act activities section. That is a standout activity that does demonstrate genuine interest and passion. Can my child build a solid extracurricular profile by participating in activities only during their senior year? The quick answer to this is not really, because by the time senior year rolls around, you'll be submitting your application either through the fall semester of your senior year, if not early on in the spring. So there's very limited time to accomplish something that, will be able to say, I spent this amount of hours and this amount of weeks per year when the Common App asks you that. But also, it's a lot more difficult to achieve something substantial within that, just 2-3 months before you submit your application. That doesn't mean a student's extracurricular engagement ends senior year. By no means. They should continue to nurture those activities they've done throughout high school. But an extracurricular profile doesn't get generated, 2 months before your application is due. So it's a process that does take time and takes coaching and takes, strategy to really execute those goals. Another question about community service and volunteering. So everyone is doing community service and volunteering, so I need to do it too, no matter what kind of volunteering it is. I think I touched upon this question earlier. Community service and volunteering is perhaps the most common extracurricular activity. Again, most high schools require some amount of service hours to graduate. Or a lot of scholarship opportunities will also require community service hours. So a lot of students just do it for the sake of getting their hours, fulfilling their graduation requirements. They don't really give it a second thought as a way to really stand out in their portfolio. But in fact, you can, if that community service and volunteering, contributes to that narrative about your interests and your goals. What social causes you care about. A lot of volunteering is around nonprofits, for example. So get involved with a cause that you care about. How can my child demonstrate leadership and initiative within STEM-related extracurricular activities? Whether it's STEM, business, humanities, social sciences, there's always an opportunity to demonstrate leadership and initiative. Being able to, for example, expand club membership, compete in tournaments at the state and national level, implement projects, lab-based work, get your team involved in, maybe signing up for different projects, competitions, for example. So these are some ways to demonstrate leadership and initiative. Maybe it's a really cool, a cool idea or project that you're proposing, and you can continue to nurture that with your club over time. Is it better for my child to have a long list of extracurricular activities? Should they focus on a few meaningful ones? Definitely focus on a few meaningful ones as far as, quantifying your impact, your leadership, your initiative. Again, as I mentioned before, it is important to be very much involved in your extracurriculars. So typically for, the students I work with that are targeting T20s, T30s, they will take up all 10 entries on the Common App, maybe 8 to 10 of those entries typically. So they will be very much involved and they will have a lot of extracurricular engagements. But again, it's important to be intentional, strategic, and understand why it is the purpose behind of why you're doing all these specific engagements. So this is the final slide of the webinar. Thank you so much. I know, Sophia, you might have a few more questions for me that I'd be happy to answer.